Hello, everybody, and welcome to the February 22nd, 2022 iteration of the Kubernetes SIG Windows community meeting. As always, these meetings are recorded and uploaded to YouTube, so be sure to adhere to the CNCF Code of Conduct. Let's get started with some announcements. Jay, Amin, or Shinchi, do you want to start off with this announcement?
Yeah, so we are planning to do a demo in the operational readiness in a few weeks with a few of the tests that we have and the prototype.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be exciting. Just feel free to put it on the agenda whenever you guys are ready to demo that.
Okay.
Anything else you wanted to say now about that, or carry on?
Yeah, we are having some discussions on putting these tests upstream directly. So I think we are going to start with a prototype outside KK first, and then move the tests when you have a good amount of them. Right, so we have like categories of tests, and starting with the GMSA, we are starting creating a few of them. So we have two options here. We go like with all with one batch of PRs and just merge everything, or we can like prototype everything outside KK and then move when we are ready.
Okay, yeah, usually smaller PRs are more manageable to merge in, but that's, I think, it always depends on the situation. Cool. Thanks for the update. Next announcement I added, for people who are using the GMSA webhook image, we have made some progress with turning that into an official Kubernetes image. We are now publishing images to the Kate staging GCR, the official Kate staging GCR. This is the path for the current container image. You can, I think that we always publish the latest image too, so folks can go ahead and test that. The next steps is to, we're working on image promotion to promote it to the prod Google Container Registry images. So if you're using that, I think previously we were publishing the image to the SIG Windows Tools Docker Hub account, but we're slowly trying to stop publishing images to that. So start pulling from the staging repository if you get a chance. Last announcement, James, did you want to take this one?
Sure. So I think 2 weeks ago, we announced that we're just moving over to CAPC from AKS Engine for the Windows tests. And so we merged that PR today. So just everything 124 and forward, we're going to be using Cluster API for Azure. This lets us have all the code inside the CNCF repositories instead of AKS Engine. And should make it a little bit more manageable and easier for folks to be able to contribute fixes because it's built on top of Cluster API. I'm thinking maybe next week, if there's interest, I could do a 5-minute demo on just where to look for all the logs, because the log structure for the end-to-end tests changed. So I can just do that so that people have kind of awareness if they're looking into debugging some of the tests.
That'd be great. And for those of you who joined at the end of the SIG Windows CI meeting, we've discovered that the AKS Engine jobs are no longer reporting logs. So I think James said that logs are different, but right now we're only getting logs for the CAPC jobs. So it's another reason to move over. Okay, does anybody, I don't see anything on the agenda today. I don't really have anything either. Does anybody on the call want to talk about any of the 124 enhancements and the status of those? I think we're coming up to just about 4 or 5 weeks of coding left. Otherwise, if anybody has any suggestions, feel free to add it to the agenda. Just start talking.
Hey, Mark. So I just want to call out that by the next few hours, I have a couple of more comments that I want to address, but the node log viewer should be open up for reviews. So I'm thinking maybe like you folks can review it first, and then we can start gathering reviews from SIG node, SIG CLI, and I think an API server review is also needed.
Yeah, I think there were new API types added to facilitate the kubectl communication, right? Yeah, that would be great. Do you want to just let us know on Slack when you're ready for that first round of reviews?
Yeah, I was planning on posting it later today, but since we're talking about it here, I thought I might as well give an update.
Okay, and there was a demo for anybody who's interested. There was a demo of that at one of the previous meetings. I'll add a link to the recording after this too. Then. So
okay, sounds good.
That'll be exciting. Ravi, are you on the call? We can quickly go over the PodOS field to beta. I saw that there was a PR open. Jordan Liggett had a couple of comments. I think the big one was just wanting to make sure we had all of the necessary test coverage that we were committing to in the KEP. Let me open that.
Sorry, I am in another call, so I may not be able to give an update, but I think I'll post it on Slack in a few minutes.
Okay, that works. I'll link to the issue or the PR after this too, not on the call. Yeah, I guess we'll just open it up to any other discussions, or we can go into the pairing early. Going once, going twice. All right, thank you everybody for attending. I'm going to stop the recording right now. All right, go ahead whenever.
Okay, so the problem I kind of wanted to talk about is charts that don't work with Windows, right? And there's really two concepts here. There's charts that can deploy to Windows, and then there's charts that can deploy in a cluster with Windows, right, for mixed workloads. So Cert Manager is one of those that I just have it set up here easy for me. So if I install this, I'm pretty much going to guess that it's going to schedule, because there's no node selectors defined. I could add some, but by default, there's not any. If I install this, I'm pretty positive it's going to get scheduled on my Windows node. And when this is done, you'll notice that it's not going to start up, right? And that's mainly because you can't just run things on Windows nodes, right? Like it's got to be compatible. It's interesting. I have to get this to resize. So we'll see this comes out here. I'm curious where it got scheduled, but we'll start seeing them when they start coming up. Like the injector, it might have got scheduled for Windows. Yep, see, got scheduled on Windows. This is going to fail, right? This is a common problem you run into because I have a mixed workload cluster, right? I have both Windows and Linux workers. And so anything you deploy is really going to fail. And so, you could easily just add a node selector to this, and then it would schedule only on Linux, right? But that's not by default. And that's really frustrating for me because I just want to be able to grab a chart and deploy it, right? So there's our error image.
You're not alone there. You are definitely not alone there.
Yeah. And so we spend a lot of time like doing some of the underlying work, but a good way to get involved, at least in my opinion, is if you come across these things, just kind of fix them. And so the idea here is that like, how do we fix this? The easy answer would be to add a node selector. But if you go to the project and you can see there's actually a ticket open that says, hey, let's add a node selector. So in a hybrid mixed workload cluster, things are going to deploy, there's no errors. And this is a really interesting conversation that they're having because here is a project asking for Windows images and building their software to where it works on Windows. And so they actually have an issue open If I can get up here, they actually have a bunch of windows, and one of them is full Windows images for all components. So that's kind of interesting that they're asking for that. They consider this a priority. They keep saying it's not stale. They really want somebody to pick up and do this work. And so part of doing this kind of work, as some of us know, and maybe some people newer to the SIG don't know, is that not everything just works on Windows. And there's lots of comments in a lot of these issues open around this that like, well, it compiles. And it in fact does compile for Windows. If you set the goose to Windows, if you're on Linux, it will compile even from a Windows box, which I'm on right now. If I go in here to like any of these projects like the CA injector and say I pull up a terminal here and Zoom is really annoying for these bars. There we go. So if I pull up a terminal, I'm in here. If I just do a go build, the injector, you know, this should build no errors, which is actually kind of interesting. Typically, if you just try to build something, I'm sure most of us kind of know this in some ways, but if you just try to build something on Windows, if it's pulling in something that's Linux specific from like the Go standard library or a component, then it won't compile, right? Because it'll fail because that's not available for this architecture. So this compiled. So the next step in some of this stuff is that these all compile, which I've tested most of these. But the one issue comes into is now that I have this compiled binary just sitting in here, this is not using the build system at all that they use here, which is a different conversation. And I don't know if they're using SIGO. So, which I'm sure in some instances, I believe they are. So that requires MinGW to be installed, right? So this gets complicated really quick, just trying to support Windows.
Well, and yeah, and just because it compiles doesn't mean it's fully functional. A lot of times if there's heavy usage of like the OS package, that your mileage may vary, and sometimes you have to use the XSys Windows package instead.
Yes. And so that gets even more interesting. So I don't know about the controller runtime. That's the first thing that jumped out to me. It seems to compile just fine for Windows, but that is used here. So I've made kind of notes about this. So my idea here is kind of just to walk through potentially like solving this problem. You know, because it's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of parts for people to learn and kind of tackle if you wanted to even start doing this. And so like, for example, this compiles. So now that compiles, I should figure out how to build a Windows image for it. And then from there, you know, deploy it and see if it works. Run some basic tests against it. Make sure that it actually works as designed. So that has led me down the road of like preparing for this, looking through here. So if anybody knows Bazel or Bazel, I could probably really use some help there because it does not seem to work on Windows.
Didn't they remove Bazel from Kubernetes as well?
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Is there can you check real quick in the hack folder? Is there like a hack update Bazel? A lot of projects that I've seen, yeah, just rely on these scripts to update all the Bazel dependencies. I've never done, I think that's about the extent of my interaction with Bazel.
Yeah,
So my suggestion would be to do cross compilation. Basically, you would build the Windows binaries on a Linux node. In that case, you won't encounter any sort of dependency issues like Bazel or whatever. And basically just copy over the Windows binary into Windows whenever you need it. You can even do this for container images. For example, We even do this for a couple of the Kubernetes test images, and I think also for the pause image, which, by the way, also requires the mean GW compiler for Windows. So we are actually using that. Basically, it compiles on Linux in a Linux stage, and just copies over that compiled binary into a Windows image, typically a nano server image. And you have a working image for Windows.
Yeah, we do all the Rancher stuff the same way. So
Mhm.
we currently build everything on Linux except for the Windows containers. So that's I'm used to that part. It's just kind of an interesting thing to make sure that you get this all built correctly. And where are the right hooks at? Because I seem to can't be. Now I'm using OpenSUSE, so maybe that's my problem. The Bazel scripts and some of the stuff don't seem to work correctly, at least on Tumbleweed. So I need to get a new Ubuntu instance set up to see if it works better there, because it's kind of written in that direction, it seems.
I think that might be the best option, in my opinion, because if they have automated image building processes, like some GitHub Actions or whatever, they might already be using an Ubuntu image or something, and basically
I've not found any CI files in here at all to know what CI they're using to do this, which is again been kind of interesting.
Do they even have a Docker file or something? How do they build the image?
That's in the make. Where's the make directory at? This is an interesting project and a really deep one to dive into. So they have all these make steps for building, and they use CTR, which is this is their tag for here. So they're doing some interesting stuff with this CMCTL, which is something that they compile themselves here.
Oh, why?
I have no clue.
Who are the cert managed? Is my mic too loud? I don't know.
No, it's not too hot.
Okay. Who are the cert manager people? Is this, who owns this? Who runs it? Is there a community?
JetStack is like the sponsor of their Helm repo and stuff like that. But I don't know who's officially running Cert Manager. They do have a Slack channel that I need to get plugged into. But this one's a
Slack group or a Slack channel on Kubernetes?
They have both. They actually have a Slack group just for development. So
okay.
Yeah, I need to get plugged in there. So I just ran out of time getting all of this stuff prepped, but I did want to talk about this problem and pick the complicated example.
Yeah.
But this should be several weeks worth of.
True. I also have some vested interest in Cert Manager. And I actually tried it out last week and it didn't quite work for me.
It is tricky to get it set up and figuring out how to use the injectors. And I have that in the GMSA chart to use Cert Manager to generate your certs, and that all seems to work.
Yeah, the way I was trying to use it, apparently you can also add an annotation into the Nginx ingress resources in Kubernetes, and that will basically cause the Cert Manager to auto-generate certificates for you using the mentioned cert provider in the annotation. And you can even use different plugins for CAs, for example, Let's Encrypt or whatever. But it didn't work for me. I mean, I don't see how it would have worked in the first place, because I don't think it sets up any sort of HTTP responders for the challenges, which is then, I mean, how is it going to get solved then? That's what I didn't quite understand.
Let's see here.
Also, CNCF, it's a CNCF sandbox project right now, Cert Manager. I just checked. So it is under the CNCF purview now.
Okay, good. Then I'm going to have to get plugged in for this, but I think this is just good to talk about, because these are the types of challenges that somebody's going to face, like getting into this and wanting to know how to contribute. And so right here is where I'm using it to inject the CA. And it knows how to, for webhooks, to automatically add the CA bundle config stuff if you have it enabled. So yeah, it's magic. It just works. And it seems to have worked, but it's definitely hard to read through and logic about. And I looked at a lot of webhooks that use Cert Manager before I kind of got the idea of what combination.
Also, what kind of certificates are generating? Self-signed or?
Yeah, self-signed by default on this one.
I mean, that's the easy part. The tricky part I had issues with was where CA approved once. Yeah. You see.
So I got a lot of stuff to learn here that I hope to like post back and share for like some of these more complex projects and problems, because this one's been frustrating. The little bit I've looked at it, because I can't just check it out and build it. So I can't even just switch architecture and get all the things in the right places and then worry about making images. So that's something I'm going to have to
So
figure
one
out.
thing we should do, like, if you're filing good first issues for these and other applications we need help on, like, Jamie, one thing you could do is, like, if you could give us like a set of high level instructions for like a new contributor that were like, okay, like you see something and you want to run it on Windows. First do this, then do this, then do this. Because I was just doing this with KPNG last night. Like I was like, okay, I want to run this in a container. First, let me compile a Windows binary and just run that Windows binary on a Windows OS to see if it works. Right? That was like what I was doing. I was doing that yesterday. And I use the dev tools, SIG Windows dev tools for that. So, so I did that and it worked. And then I started asking myself, like, how do I put this KPNG kubeproxy thing into a container? And then I didn't really know how to answer that question other than pinging maybe James, because I know he's, I think, done this. And I know some folks at Rancher have done it. And then I'm like, well, I don't even know if I'm building a Windows container image, like, how should I build it? Like, what's the right base image? And especially if it's a host process image. So there's sort of a decision tree of how to test things. And for me, what I do is I literally run the binary on a Windows machine, and that's how I test. And so I think
going forward, to me, KO brings a lot of stuff to the table. So that uses Crane, which we had the demo for a few months ago.
Yeah, I think Jason Hall came and demoed that.
Yeah.
KO is made specifically for building Go projects and putting them in Windows containers, all from any platform. So it doesn't matter. You don't need a Windows box to build the Windows container. It just layers it in to the existing base image that you picked. Now it's only going to work for things that are single binaries, basically, or anything you can bundle up and place in there, right? But it's a lot faster.
The build process that we've been slowly migrating to, that Claudio mentioned earlier too, using Docker, using BuildKit, we can build Windows container images on Linux machines as well. There are some pretty substantial caveats to that right now, but that's also possible.
So that setup's challenging. That's the hard part of that one.
Yeah. I'd also like to highlight too that I think that where we started was that there was no node selector on the issue. One thing that I've seen in a couple places, including one of the projects that I was converting to work for Windows, was that even once we get a container image out that works for Windows, there's no guarantee that the fields that the pods that need to be set in the pod specs are even going to be compatible between Windows and Linux. If you need to do anything with like capabilities or the Linux security context, it's like that pretty much automatically excludes raw deployment, like raw Kubernetes spec files, from being able to support both architectures. Now, if we do start using like Helm is smart enough to, you can set in like a configuration for what OS to use, and we could kind of conditionally put in all of the specific pod spec fields for each OS too. But I think that's another common concern that people who are focused on Linux and the Linux deployments don't really realize either. So just because we can build the container images and binaries to run on Windows and Linux doesn't mean that we can share the same deployment specs in, I'd say, more cases than not.
Yeah.
I guess kind of going along with that, I was just wondering, like, are you planning on running Cert Manager on the Windows nodes?
No. What I would like to happen is it just install without me thinking about it from upstream, which means that
Yeah.
either I need to have node selectors by default, or it needs to be able to run in a mixed workload or hybrid cluster without any effort.
Or yeah,
Yeah,
like a multi-arch container image that
Yeah.
just knows what node to run on or what node OS to run on, right?
Yeah. And so that's kind of how I'm approaching this is they've expressed their desire that that's what they want, is for it to run in Windows on Windows nodes.
Because of the problems with having to do all that extra stuff with the YAML file, as well as who knows if there's just performance problems that might creep up with the Windows side of things, or some other problem, some weird edge case because you're running on Windows. Should we go back to them and say, like, hey, SIG Windows really doesn't recommend to necessarily do this, because who's going to maintain it for the Windows side and do all that additional testing on the top? I think it would be maybe a bad situation if a customer deploys this thing, they think they deployed it to Linux, it ends up on a Windows node, and then they have some sort of strange issues because it's not tested or maintained by anybody. So I'm wondering if we actually go back to them and just say, you know, we've discussed this and maybe we need to approach it from a different angle.
That's kind of part of while I'm looking at this is I want to get it building. I want to get it publishing. I want to get it running and see if it works or doesn't work without any code changes. And if it doesn't work without any code changes, then I think, you know, coming back with even more of the information and you know, coming back with, like, we tried this, here's the problem, here's the difficulty there, and this is what it's going to take to change the project, that I think that they'd probably be more receptive of doing node selectors at that point. So I'm trying to do all the work up front to, like, plus it's kind of a fun little thing to work on, right? Is like, how do you take something complex and make it work in a cluster with Windows nodes? And I think, you know, I just want to approach it as this is what they want. Let's try to do it. And if it doesn't work, or we find the thing that's going to prevent it from happening, then we can just come back and have the conversation about, you know, here's the blocker. You know, do you want to make these changes or not make these changes? Or can these changes even be made? Like, there's some things that maybe have to have at Linux that is not obvious. You know, like, it's not flagged to build only on Linux. And so it just expects you are on Linux, period. And then there's no equivalent for Windows.
I think that, yeah, I think that maybe the first step in that guide that Jay is suggesting to write, I think should probably be, does this even make sense to run on Windows? I think that there's definitely cases, like both cases. There's a lot of projects like, you know, node exporter that, yes, this is should run as a daemon set on every node in your cluster. So in those cases, we do want this to run on Windows and Linux. Things like Cert Manager, I don't know. It's like, it's not like you want one instance and then maybe some redundancy that doesn't need to run on the Windows nodes. So that, yeah, I think this should be the first step, is like, do you want it to run on Windows nodes or not? And then maybe provide a little bit of that guidance too. And as we're talking about this more, I do see that guide that Jay suggested to write could be good to publish, and, you know, point to, like, reference from these issues that the issues in these GitHub repositories where people are like, you know what, we want to support Windows, but we don't know how to do it. So this could be, I think this could add a lot of value.
Yeah, I'm making a note. And I think this is all a good point, because this ties into Windows operational readiness, right? Like, at a high level, like, does all your things going to work in a cluster with Windows? You know, can everything be deployed without any errors? Do you have node selectors? Do you have your affinities? Do you have all these things? Like, I think that kind of feeds into that same line of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
because that's a big conversation we're having right now is, you know, we have mixed workload environments. Like that's a big story we're kind of pushing. And if charts aren't compatible with mixed workloads, or if charts don't support it without modification at installation, which can be done. Almost all charts support adding node selectors or node affinities or whatever you want to do. It still is just a problem that people need to know to do that. And, you know, it's just one of those things. I think that, you know, I added Windows to my cluster and now it broke everything.
Yeah.
that we want to kind of avoid. So.
Yep. Makes sense.
Okay. Well, that's all pretty much I had, was just like a high level of the problem. And I told Jay I could do something like every other week or whenever I get some progress on this and kind of show what's happening and what was done to like move it forward. And I'll start writing up this guide as I go. So that way we can have something to point people to help them like make the decision if they want to take on the work or not do it. Because it would be nice
and I can help find a place for that guide. We recently, some of the leads were doing the annual report, and part of that was doing a scrub of like the SIG Windows like contributing guide. And this might be a good, I'm wondering, like we should at least link it to there, but I can help find the place for that and publicize it.
Yeah, and the thing I've noticed is 95% of projects are receptive to doing something to support Windows, you know, and I don't think Cert Manager is not receptive. You know, they're picking a choice that they prefer, and you know, we're gonna have to do the work, or somebody's gonna have to do the work to either say this effort's not worth it or not going to work, you know, and go with a different solution. So I think that's going to be the challenging part with some of these projects, you know, is convincing other people to maybe take a different approach to a problem based on how they want to actually take the approach.
I'm kind of hopeful that if we can give them maybe like the information they need to make the decision in this guide, that would like ease a lot of friction here.
Yep. I didn't even realize that they had all this stuff. It's like, I mean, they seem to have paved the path early on to assert that it's Linux, you know? So it seems like they're ready for Windows from that standpoint. And then also it's very much focused on Linux, right? So it's hard to tell, but we know what they want. And so I'm gonna try to go through and do some of this work, just learning about other projects and stuff like that. So I figured I would share that with everybody as I go through it, because it's going to be a fun thing to untangle.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to like, you know, contribute to a wide variety of different projects if that's what you're interested in. I know some people like to dabble in all over.
I'm just fixing the problems I have.
That too.
Which is you're deploying a GMSA chart and you need Cert Manager, and I don't want it to fail for you.
Yeah, and with GMSA you kind of need the Windows. Like this makes sense in your cluster.
Yeah, it's useless at that, right? Not that it deploys on Windows, but it's useless if you don't have Windows. So
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing today.
Yep.
Yeah. Hopefully it's somewhat insightful. I think we had some good discussion here, because it's just all these little things, you know, the more you realize, the more you're like, there's a lot of work that's got to be done.
Yep.
And I don't even know the time frame to take to do the work.
It's always some yak shaving going on.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Jamie. I'm gonna stop the recording now. We'll add this to the agenda too then. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Keep us updated.
Yeah, I'm gonna figure out a bigger goal is to prove it can all be done from Windows. So I mean, I find it a little frustrating to tell Windows devs, hey, get involved with Kubernetes. Oh, by the way, you need to learn Linux.
Are you going to caveat that with I'll stop the recording and then we can talk a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.